Hello, everybody. Agenda today really is a deep dive into DSP, talk about the real power of DSP, which is Amazon's audiences. We will talk about anatomy of typical DSP campaigns. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about strategy around DSP, recipe for success, and then we'll close with a Q&A. Before I jump into DSP, a little bit of context on what has been happening with the Amazon ad business. And I think at the root of it, it all starts with the many ways in which Amazon engages consumers. First started off with retail, now it's content, gaming, movies, different devices, so on and so forth. And of course, they're now unleashing each of these assets through their ad business. They focused on retail to begin with, and that's where sponsored ads took footing, right? So for the longest time, sponsored ads supported keyword targeting, which is buying ads on specific searches by consumers, as well as now product targeting, which is going after specific product detail pages, specific products. So that was sponsored products, right? But what they have been doing, in the more recent past, is leveraging all the other interactions of consumers with their different assets, offering those out as a targeting option for you. Okay, that's a little bit of context. Let me tie this into DSP. DSP stands for Demand Side Platform. It's a programmatic way to reach Amazon audiences both on and off Amazon. There is a little bit of overlap with what is called sponsored ad, where in the recent past, Amazon introduced a ad type called sponsored display through which you can actually go after audiences, but it kind of has its limitations. We call it DSP Lite, but DSP is the full-on audience targeting platform with quite a bit of reach and configurability and customizability. And that's what we're going to dig into today. Just a quick note on the different targeting options across Amazon ad platforms. Sponsored ads today lets you target keywords, products, and audiences in a limited way through sponsored display. DSP is all about audiences. It's important for me to kind of touch on, at a broad level, the key use cases of DSP. And I would think about it in two different terms. One is endemic advertisers. So I would say these are companies selling stuff on Amazon. And the other is non-endemic advertisers. And I think there's a use case of there's value props for both. And I know that some of you are actually non-endemic advertisers. So example of that is a hotel chain, a cruise line, an insurance company. And then there are fundamentally a couple of use cases. For endemic advertisers, of course, you can drive people to your own products on Amazon through these audiences. The second component of that is you can also drive audiences to your own site. But as an endemic advertiser, that's going to come with some restrictions where you're going to have some placement limitations where your inventory is largely off Amazon, ad inventory is largely off Amazon. And the non-endemic ones, of course, is, they can target these audiences and bring people to their own websites. So that's the power of DSP. I mean, sponsored display, which is an ad type on sponsored ads, has no value prop for non-endemic advertisers, for instance. But yeah, so these are the kind of the main use cases. With that, let's dive into this notion of audiences, which is the true power of DSP. We view it as there's kind of broadly three kinds of audiences. There is pre-built audiences, which is Amazon collecting a ton of information as consumers engage with all their different assets and allowing you to target them. There is custom audiences, which is you have the ability to define the audience you want to go after, but based on Amazon data. So an example of that could be, hey, people who viewed this product in the last 7 days or purchased that product in the last 30 days. So that's custom audience. And the third aspect is custom audiences with your own data. So you could put a pixel on your site and have Amazon collect data. For those of you that have been in the Google display advertising realm, you may have remembered the term customer match. The concept there is you could upload customer information and Google would go create lookalike audiences for you. You could do something very, very similar here as well. So broadly speaking, I would think about audiences in those three buckets. And let me give you some examples under each of these. So for pre-built, right, there is, demographic, interest, lifestyle, and let me even take it one step further and give you a very specific example. So a life event pre-built audience could be, hey, new pet owners, or I just bought a vehicle, or I'm traveling soon, or recent movers. So this is, as you can see, this is an extremely rich set of data that you could be going after. On the custom audience based on Amazon data, this is a little bit more straightforward. Here's an example, right? I can pick a bunch of ASINs and say, hey, I want to create an audience pool of people that have viewed or bought that product in X days or searched that product in Y days or whatever that may be. I can even do things like, hey, people that watched certain genre or content from a certain actor on Prime Video. So those are all custom audiences off of Amazon data. Now, these options keep evolving, keep changing. So every week I look, there is something new. But largely speaking, I would think about it in these buckets. And then the specific set of audiences that work for you, the advertiser, will just really depend on you. And the specific objectives you have. But at least in broad terms, this is how I would think about it. Let me take this one step further. And so that's audiences, but let's now get into I'll warn you, we will get into a little bit of weeds on what do campaigns on DSP look like. They're not exactly the same as the nomenclature is not the same as sponsored ads, but broadly speaking, for an advertiser, you either have your own your own seat at the DSP, or you're working with an agency that has a seat, or Amazon may be running for. If Amazon is running for you, don't kind of worry about all this minutia. But in either case, broadly speaking, there are three entities to think about. Orders, those are synonymous with campaigns. I know everyone's familiar with campaigns, so I think about it that way. Creatives, which is the asset that the consumer sees. And then we've been talking about, which is audiences. And it is about pulling these pieces together to achieve your goal. Let me peel the layers further. So at the order level, what you're defining is budgets, flights, goals, right? Amazon wants you to define a goal. Is it awareness? Is it purchase of products? So on and so forth. You have a few options. Frequency caps, for those of you that have been in the display advertising world, you know exactly what this is. But if you've never heard of it, that's just a mechanism to limit the number of time a particular consumer sees your ad in a given day. That's frequency caps. So at a high level, that's where it starts. And then at an order level, you're defining your conversion tracking, right? So if your display ads are all about driving people to products on Amazon, so the products you want to track as purchases or conversions get defined at an order level. Creatives is where you map everything that you're advertising. So if you're advertising products on Amazon, those map to specific creatives. A quick note on creatives, and by the way, I could spend a full session on creatives, so I'll keep it at a high level for now. There's many different options, images, videos, different sizes. And if you are an endemic advertiser just really going after traffic to bring them to your product detail pages, there's a couple of options at the top, which is responsive commerce, where Amazon takes all the product data and kind of dynamically builds that asset themselves, and dynamic e-commerce, which is just a little bit more customizability on top of the responsive e-commerce. So if you're endemic and focused on products, those are probably the two things you'll go focus on. If you're trying to do other things, of course, images and videos and different sizes of assets are all options under the creative. Peeling this further, so once you have orders and creatives and audiences, you now get into what are called line items. This is where all the action is, okay? At an individual line item level, you are defining a combination of creative, audience, supply source, and many other things. I'm just simplifying it. I'll give you a deeper view into this. But what you're trying to do is, okay, what products / creatives should be combined with what audiences, and what supply sources should we target? I'll talk more about supply sources in the next slide, but think about supply sources as, is it Amazon.com? Is it publisher services? Is it off Amazon through AppNexus? So the granularity, the elbow grease, right? All of that is happening at the line item level. The quality of what happens or the outcomes is very much dependent on the quality of execution at this level. Just a bit more detail on line items. So at an individual line item level, there's all kinds of things you could be defining. I talked about supply sources. Here's just a quick glance of some of the supply sources. The ones at the top are Amazon's own supply sources. The ones at the bottom are external off Amazon sources. But at a line item level, there's a ton of things you could be doing, right? You could be specifying location constraints, domain exclusions, supply sources, devices, audiences, so on and so forth. What you do is at a line item level, you are defining a base and a max supply bid, which is one thing to note. The way bidding works here, it's not CPC, it's CPM. So you're defining a base and max. Remember, you already defined a goal at an order level, and Amazon goes and does its thing, trying to help you achieve that goal with these bid constraints in mind and all these other constraints in mind. So that's what happens at a line item level. But what you end up with, right, is this view, a bunch of orders under which are defined line items. And under each line item is this combination of creative, audience, supply source. And from an execution standpoint, just FYI, like with many other things, Amazon's DSP solution is evolving. I will say that a lot of the execution in this realm is very, very, very manual. And there's a lot of opportunity ahead. I know Amazon themselves is making a ton of effort in trying to make this process a lot more automated so that we don't spend all our time just creating line items. And then from an Intentwise perspective too, technology goals we have is how do we simplify this execution? One of the goals we have is how do we simplify this execution for you? We'll talk about that later on. But I want to leave you with granularity of execution gives you leverage. If you bundled a whole bunch of audiences into one line item and each audience is performing very differently, you just lose that leverage. So what I recommend to people is you got to maintain granularity. Of course, it has to be balanced with how much of that you can manage, but that is certainly one aspect of optimization that should be kept in mind when it comes to DSP campaigns. But that's your anatomy of DSP campaigns. I'm sure there's a bunch little minutiae that I've missed out, but I think broadly speaking, keep the structure in mind. And again, I will share out this recording with you. So now that we have talked about audiences, now that you've talked about anatomy of DSP campaigns, let's get into a little bit of strategy around this, right? So you've all seen this funnel before in the marketing realm. Broadly speaking, top of the funnel to the bottom, awareness, consideration, purchase generally tend to be the goals. For each of these goals, there are different audiences that you want to keep in mind. Obviously, the lifestyles and the demographics are at the higher end of the funnel. Products, brands, purchases at the lower end of the funnel. In market would be right in between. For some of you that may have been doing display advertising, let me just call out the elephant in the room, which is you often, if you are someone that comes from a performance marketing DNA, where it's all about ROAS and ACOS, a good chunk of your DSP budget is going towards awareness and consideration. There is no way you are going to see those same ACOS and ROAS metrics that you have seen in sponsored ads. And I know that today that leads to a lot of heartache for a lot of people. What I want to say is that I do believe that it is super important to not conflate reach and awareness goals from purchase and conversion goals. From a reach perspective, there's a few different metrics to keep in mind. Pure tonnage impressions. And by the way, I want to say one more thing when it comes to reach. Today, I can honestly say that from a reach and brand awareness standpoint, we have had from an online perspective, we have had Google and Google's different assets and Facebook. Amazon now is an important contender, and what makes it unique? It is the types of audiences and the precision that is offering you. It may or may not work for everyone everywhere, but that is the uniqueness about this platform when it comes to reach. If you are leveraging and thinking about DSP for reach, I strongly urge you to compare metrics of reach and efficiency of reach with other comparable channels. Don't do that against sponsored ads. Of course, sponsored ad ACOS will be much better all the time. So I would avoid doing that, and I would just think about comparing with the right channels if you're spending your money with the goal of awareness and reach. Certain things we do see when you do things on DSP that shows up on, let's say, sponsored ads or overall sales is impressions, trends changing, brand search volumes changing. So spending on DSP, you start to see brand search volumes in your sponsored ads start to go up. We have seen that. Does it happen every time? Not sure, but that's just one of many things that to keep an eye on. eCPMs is a good way to compare eCPMs of this channel versus other channels where you're executing with similar goals. So that's on the reach side. Of course, when it comes to acquisition, the simplest thing to do is the bottom of the funnel, retargeting. Go after those people that have viewed your product and have not purchased, right? Through sponsored ads today, you could use some sponsored display. It takes a 30-day window, but in DSP, you could literally define a window of 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, and keep going after them from a retargeting perspective on and off Amazon. So that would be lower funnel. And of course, there the metrics can be ACOS, ROAS, purchases, new to brand metrics. There is a whole host of new to brand metrics around purchases that DSP offers you. That's something that should be looked at, certainly for benchmark comparison or ongoing improvement of your DSP spend. Two other things I want to call out in terms of broad measurement to keep in mind when you're spending on DSP. We believe, and we've seen this, we believe it's important to have a holistic view of overall spend and what is happening to sales. What I mean by that is DSP sponsored ads both together, uh, just correlating DSP spends with overall sales trajectories, right? Or if you had spend down, what happened? You had spend up, what happened? So that's one aspect. The other is keeping an eye on percent of ad spend versus sales, right? Overall ad spend versus overall sales. So that's another metric I would keep in mind. I will say all this and also admit that the measurement around this in a way that all of us that come from very different contexts are comfortable is still an evolving thing. But I will leave you with saying that there is precision of targeting, certainly if your goals are reach and awareness. And to the extent you can, you should exploit that as part of your marketing strategy. So that's kind of broadly how we think about strategy around DSP. Let me move on to how we kind of internally think about a recipe for success with DSP. In my view, kind of boils down to fundamentally four things. Number one, do you have goal clarity? Again, like I said this before, having a flavor of execution where you're going for reach and awareness and measuring for immediate ACOS, bad idea, right? So having goal clarity and tying that to execution, that's one. Second, the granularity of execution. Again, I brought this up before. This is like elbow grease function, you know. And by the way, if somebody is spending DSP money for you, there is a report called audience segmentation report. Get it and kind of look at, hey, are there opportunities to fine tune this, right? Also get an inventory report which tells you all the different placements where your ad showed up. Maybe you can, negate and get rid of some of these things. But the idea is granularity of execution matters. Okay. And that's the second component. Third component is continuous discovery. I guarantee you, I don't think anyone can come in and define a future success story of what combination of audiences will make sense for you. Part of this is a discovery process. A part of this will change with the products you're trying to promote. So I think audience discovery is a continuous process. And then the measurement aspect, like I've said before, there is a bunch of metrics and DSP shares. There are things we'll have to kind of evolve over time around how to effectively measure this. But I think the point is putting these four pieces together, in my opinion, makes up that recipe for success. And those who do this well, regimentally in a disciplined manner, in an iterative fashion, I think are going to be the winners with DSP. A few current challenges that I just want to call out with DSP, right? So for anyone that is running DSP campaigns, I mean, I've heard this so many times now, which is it's just manual and time consuming, right? So I know it's going to get better. I know Amazon is working on stuff today, but it is manual, it is time consuming. It also gets in the way of you getting to that granularity of execution. So there's certainly that. Misalignment of goals, and I've touched on this multiple times now. The only point I want to make there is measure awareness bound execution with awareness goals and conversion bound execution with conversion goals, and just don't conflict the two. And I see that happen all the time. That's why I keep reiterating this. And the third aspect is just constructing a holistic view of Amazon, right? And it could start with something very simple, which is DSP spend, sponsored ad spend, organic sales in one view, right? Let's start there. And we can get more fancy with it over time. And our plans are to apply statistical model techniques to this and understand incrementality over time. And that's the path we are going to go down. But let's start with first order problem, which is having a clean view of DSP, sponsored ads, and organic sales, right? So those are some challenges today. What are we doing about it? Number one focus for our DSP solution is enabling more and more automation with campaign execution. Second is enabling granular audience targeting, building that holistic view delivering that holistic view for you that I was talking about. And then we're also going to be investing in kind of analytical models to fine-tune measurement of outcomes. And that concludes my presentation today. And I hope you now have a good grasp of what DSP is, and reach out to us if you want to discuss how DSP could work for you. Thank you for joining today, and hope to see you in a future session. Bye bye.